to present the results of a literature study we've done. To our knowledge, it's the first literature study focusing exclusively on BoHV1. I know of one other that also incorporated BDVV, leptospirosis and Johne's disease. It was done by Steven van Winde in the UK. I've been in dairy practice for 10 years, also been a teacher at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at Utrecht University. And for the last 4 years, I've been working at GD Animal Health. And I focus completely on IBR and BVD. So that means consultancy of both vets and farmers on the diseases, presentations, and we also do research on the disease, as well internal as external. We also do external contract researching. For those of you who are not familiar with the map of Europe, this is where Holland is, in the northwestern tip of the continent. We're surrounded by a lot of countries. This is Holland, and this is where our headquarters are. Holland is very small. If we compare it to the island where we're here now in Japan, Hokkaido, Hokkaido in square kilometers is already 2.5 times bigger than Holland. But although that, we have 2.8 million dairy cows on 17,000 farms. So that means about 100 adult milking cows per herd. So a very densely populated area. We're the largest veterinary diagnostic lab in Europe, and we're a private, non-subsidized organization. And next year we exist already for 100 years. We develop and provide disease control schemes for ruminants, swine, and poultry. And we have veterinary experts in all infectious diseases. We run large self-funded R&D programs, and therefore we are often consulted for policy making by the dairy industry, and that's why also this study came around. Now, this is a picture of our company, and these little trucks run every morning through the whole country to pick up dead animals and bring them in for pathology in the afternoon. So IBR and the causative agent bovine herpesvirus 1 is endemic in the Netherlands. We have voluntary programs running for about 20 years now. And the last few years there's been discussion within the industry, the dairy industry and the meat industry, on mandatory eradication. Why? Well, about 50% of holdings are free at the moment, but this always poses a risk for reintroduction of the virus, since not the whole nation is complying with it. So this poses animal health issues, economic losses, and the dairy industry asks us to perform a study to come with evidence-based recommendations on how to conquer the virus. So the aims of our study were to determine the relevant risk factors for BHV1 in scientific literature, and these results can then be used for communication purposes, for the modeling we've done on the disease, and for the amelioration of the existing voluntary programs we already have. Well, what did we do? We started in January 2016, and we went to the internet and typed in risk factor in 2 major search engines, PubMed and Web of Science, and then combined with synonyms for BoHV1. And this came to more than 450 hits. So then we steps-wise graded that down to the relevant literature. Well, this is the more than 400 we started off, the Web of Science and the PubMed, and then the first cleanup session was to check for duplicates, of course, but also get out the publications that weren't relevant. For example, I came to the conclusion that IBR also means immediate breast reconstruction after mastectomy in humans, so all those papers went out. Then we had about 76 publications left. And my colleague Linda van Duin and me, we read all the abstracts and categorized them. And an inclusion criteria was that it had to be a European study. Why? Because that is most comparable to the Dutch situation, and then it's easiest to evaluate and extrapolate. The summary of the abstract had to be in English, and the full text could be in English, Dutch, German, or French. Why those four? Well, that was the only written understanding I have of these 4 languages. Then we graded it down to 18, and of these 18 abstracts, we read the full publications, and after that, 17 remained. Well, how was this dispersed over the European studies? We had them from Ireland, UK, Estonia, Belgium, Spain, Switzerland, and Italy, and some countries had more publications. And then, of course, you might ask, well, why were there already 5 Dutch studies in it? Well, this has to do, when I go a little bit back in history, 20 years ago, we had mandatory program that worked very well, but it only ran for a year, because then the whole thing was stopped because of vaccination contamination. And this caused a lot of problems. We had BVD2 type in the vaccine, and this caused a lot of dead cows, and therefore the program was stopped, and it continued voluntarily. So a lot of work was done by colleagues already in that era. Well, when reading these publications, you come to a lot of risk factors, and we categorize them in some large categories. So for herd factors, management factors, animal factors, purchase related, direct animal contact, neighborhood factors, visitor factors, and miscellaneous. And that's how we categorize them. Well, how do we then look at importance of risk factors? We use the odds ratio, and the definition for that is that a particular event, in this case IBR, is occurring in an exposed group, and then compared to the odds of the occurrence in the event of a non-exposed group. And consistently high odds ratios in several publications was for us a reason to pick them up for the conclusions. Well, these are the most important results of the 18 publications, and I'll go through them with you. Well, herd size was found to be very important. This, of course, in a large herd, you have more susceptible animals, that's for one. But on the other hand, if IBR is already on the farm, in the herd, it's more difficult to get rid of the disease. Just by relapse, by reactivation of the virus, it's difficult to get completely free. So it infects itself all the time again. Well, then purchase is a very important one. We already knew that. We have actions in our programs on that. And an interesting study was done by my predecessor at GD, Han Hagen. He did his PhD on IBR, and he looked at an isolated island in Holland, Ameland, which has 50 herds, dairy herds. And he looked at the island for 4 years. And in the four outbreaks of IBR that were on the island in those 4 years all came from purchase from the mainland, so that was very distinctive. Also interesting that dairy shows can be a risk factor. I saw an interesting study here this week by a Swiss colleague on the overbagging of udders. So it gives stress to animals, and you can imagine that this stress can also give relapse in IBR, and also the contact with a lot of other herds at that show. Well, this one was particularly important to us. Why? Because a lot of there were no evidence found that sheep or other ruminants, so sheep, goats, wild ruminants, had an effect on the risk of introducing IBR, and that's good because in Holland a lot of farmers next to the dairy cows keep sheep, or sheep are grazed with cows in the near surroundings. And there's a lot of unrest under farmers that sheep might be a reservoir. But we knew it from other studies, also by Hanhage, but this again, yeah, we found that in other European countries they saw the same. Then communal grazing, this happens more in the Alps before, in Switzerland, Italy, and in Spain in the mountains. Of course, we're a totally flat country, so we don't have that, but you can extrapolate it to a feature we have, and that are young stock raisers. We have farmers, usually elderly farmers, that stop milking cows, but they start growing heifers for other farms. And in these farms, well, a lot of animals are mingled, of course, and that's the same type you see in the communal grazing in the Alps. Then housing, there was an interesting Belgian study done in which you saw that the more buildings there were in the farm, the less of a risk it was for IBR. So what we also from practice see that IBR, if you take good hygienic measures, it could be defined to just one barn or stall. If you house everything under one roof, as we call it, well, the disease spreads through all your age categories. Then distance was also found to be an important risk factor, and I make this picture a little wider for you. This is a very typical Dutch situation where dairy farms, and these are big dairy farms, they're really, really close to each other. There's only a few hundred meters between them. We see this a lot. So a lot of cows in Holland, about 3/4 of herds graze their cows. So you can imagine there's, well, a lot of contact possible. And if your neighbor, if you're a free farm and your neighbor has IBR, it poses a real risk. Then professional visitors. Well, we as vets can also introduce the virus, iatrogenic, by giving the disease by not taking good hygienic measures, but also other visitors, AI technicians, but it was also seen in some study that just occasional visitors, so the neighbors, if they're a farmer or not, or family, or people in your barns, pose a risk for the disease. And then finally, the protective clothing, that was really a preventive factor. The use of boots and overalls in Holland is really quite good, compliance with that. And that stops a lot of microorganisms entering the farm. But of course, in communication, can still emphasize that it's very important, keep doing it, and in farms where it's well, less compliant, that it's important to do so. Well, to come to the conclusion, there are many management and environmental factors that can have a large impact on the control of IBR, and this can all be tackled by strengthening biosecurity measures, especially a closed farm system, so no purchase of cows, and the use of protective clothing for all people. For vets, it's very common to use, but especially IA technicians and traders, they often walk in without doing that. We put more emphasis after the study on purchase. Already in our voluntary programs, we have a lot of emphasis on that, but also in communication that, well, try to not buy animals, but if you buy them, check for herd status where you get them, or even check the animal in blood before you get it to your own farm. I'd like to say also that the same study was performed for BVDV, and there was a poster presentation by my colleague Linda van Duin here at the Congress. This you don't have to read real quick, but these were the 18 publications we assessed. So if you're interested in that, then feel free to email me. Thank you for your attention, and I'd like to take questions.